Hey everybody, thank you for joining me for this brief lecture on analyzing your audience before, during, and after a speech, and getting a little bit into choosing your speech topic and purpose, because the topic that you choose to present to your audience and the purpose of your speech is going to be very closely linked to who is in the audience, what do they already know, what do they need to know from your presentation, and how can you get your message across to your audience as simply and effectively as possible. So let's dive in to audience analysis. I have this group of people, all different kinds of people, dress differently, look differently, do different things. This could very well be an audience in your future, but I'm willing to bet that all of these people have something in common. And it's up to you to help find those points of identification with other people. So we're going to talk about that briefly and talk about different settings and considerations that we have to keep in mind as we're planning and presenting our speeches. Let me just advance. All right. So audience analysis, simply put, textbook definition is the process of studying an audience before, during, and after a speech. But how do we actually do that? Well, firstly, it's important to consider the disposition or the feelings of your audience toward your presentation. Are they here on a voluntary basis? They decided, hey, I'm going to come to this talk on, I don't know, 19th century fashion given by you, because that's your area of interest. Or are they here involuntarily? Okay, they are here because this is a training that you're giving that they have to take because their employer requires it, for example. Or are you at a convocation at Brunel that you're required to go to? Maybe you want to go. It's voluntary slash involuntary. That could be the case too. But you're compelled to go because you have to go. Okay, that's important. You might have to work hard to create extra buy-in or interest from an audience that's there involuntarily. So it's really important to let them know why they're there. What's the point and what are they going to get out of your talk? All right. Consider also demography, so demographics, age, sex, um, socioeconomic status, class, etc. Consider possible group affiliations, political parties, religious affiliations. Lots of things to keep in mind when you're tailoring your topic or your ideas to an audience. We won't know all of these things about people, but an easy example for me is I'm not going to go to class to my college students and talk to you about what to do with your money in retirement, right? That's just way too far. That's a whole nother generation discussion. Instead, I might talk to you about effective budgeting as a college student to save some money while a college student and be able to pay for things like meals and books, right? That would be more relevant to your age group and your interests. Finally, I mentioned this a second ago, but what do we all care about? What do we have in common? Think about the members of our class. You, me, your classmates. Well, we're all members of the Brunel community. We all want to do well and support each other in this class. We're all a little bit nervous about speaking publicly. All right, so these are all things you can tap into as you're speaking, common experiences that we share in order to connect with each other as you're speaking. So think about points of common ground and identification, especially as you move to more speaking about maybe controversial topics, okay? What do we all care about? And I'll touch on this a little bit later as well. Other things to consider with audience analysis, how formal is the occasion? Are you going to be at a big podium with a microphone to an audience of 100? Or is this going to be a really intimate setting like a talk about health and wellness in your workplace where you're going to have 10 participants and there's going to be a lot more back and forth and Q&A or audience participation opportunities, okay? Where is this speech taking place? Again, are you in a big auditorium? Are you going to have the technology available to you in the space? So in our classroom, we have access to the internet. We have a projector. We have um, uh, no microphones, but we could get a microphone if we needed to, but our classroom's not big enough. But you might present in a place that requires a microphone. Are they automatically going to have that for you? Do you want a clicker to advance your slides, right? These are things you should think about ahead of time to make your presentation and your speech as effective as possible. And have a plan if your technology fails. So if you have a fancy PowerPoint that you're ready to razzle dazzle your audience with, which by the way, you never need, but in case you have that and that's something that you want, be prepared in case the technology doesn't work. How are you going to quickly write something on the whiteboard instead? Old school technology. Or are you going to have copies of a handout with an outline of what you plan to say to give to participants in case of technology failure? Or just as a visual aid for them to have to follow along. Okay. Think about all of these things, especially as you move beyond our class and it's not as clear where the space is going to be and what it's going to be like. You can always ask the person organizing the event. Something else to think about, do you have the opportunity to ask questions about your audience ahead of time to get to know a little bit more about them? So, for example, if you have ever been to a webinar online, the organizers who are putting it together might ask questions about the audience to tailor their message. So, out of these 5 subjects, what are you most interested in hearing about in this 30-minute webinar? Okay. So if you don't have the option to poll your audience members, you might ask the organizer, okay, this group of employees I'm about to talk to, or this group of community members, what are they interested in hearing about, in your opinion, or what are they looking for from this presentation? These are all great questions to ask. All right. And finally, keep in mind, what is your audience likely to know already about your subject? And what do they still need to know? Because you don't want to create a presentation that's going to tell people a lot of things they already know. They're there to learn something from you. So try to anticipate, okay, my audience is already skilled in these areas. So I'll check in with them, make sure that's the case, and move on to something different in my talk. All right. Some of the other things, well, let's take a look at a couple examples and do some real quick audience analysis. Right here in the middle of the screen, can you find him? It's like an I Spy book. Abraham Lincoln has papers in front of him giving the second inaugural address to a crowd of, I don't know how many hundred people, a lot of dudes. And what's fascinating about this is there were no microphones, there were no PowerPoint slides or screens. Even the podium is just like this rickety little table. All right, so you can imagine he had to project to be heard over the sound of the crowd shuffling their feet, etc. And he had no microphone, so he had to really, really boom. All right, and he probably had to keep his address pretty short and sweet because he was going to lose his audience quickly. All right, luckily, this is not usually the setting we're in, unless you're in a classroom of kindergartners or something trying to say something. More likely, you might have a space like this, especially if you go into government or you present at a conference, albeit a very big conference where you have a microphone, but you have the challenge of speaking to a huge room. And look, behind the speaker, there are people sitting. So this speaker can't even attempt to make eye contact with the people behind them. So something interesting. And actually, I want to highlight Barbara Jordan. She was a representative who spoke at the 1996 Democratic National Convention. And what was special about her is that she was the first African-American woman to address a Democratic National Convention. But that's a story for another time that we'll cover a little bit later in the class. All right, more than likely, you're going to be in a setting like this, where you're in the workplace, you're presenting something to a group of people, whether you're reporting to a group of doctors, what you're noticing about a patient, or you have some reports from the psychology department about how your research is going, or you are a leader at a business organization. I don't know, but the people in the audience, they're probably going to have a lot of common ground with you, especially when it comes to your shared workplace. So think about how that setting is going to be very different than the last 2 slides we just saw. And finally, here's something you may be very used to, the pep talk at halftime during a sports game, right? The coach is going to be very different in their style, their language, their presentation, their technology. But that doesn't mean that this pep talk, when your team is down by so many points and they need to rally you, coach needs to rally you, they're going to have a very different set of circumstances than the audience in the image above. All right, so think about all these factors. What does your audience need to hear? What do they want to hear? What do they know already? And how do you convey that information as well as possible? All right, some things to avoid doing when you're preparing a speech. I will tell you, there's a big misconception that it's really important to impress your audience, razzle dazzle them with the most flowery, beautiful language and move them to tears. No, no. People want to be on the same page as you. They want to understand what you're saying. They don't want to be mystified or confused. All right. So we want to make sure that we convey information simply and in a way that people will understand and connect with. All right. So some things to avoid would be jargon, also known as argot or slang. This is specialized vocabulary of a professional or social group, and you might have some of this based on your major, but not everyone in here or in your audience is going to be a chemistry major or a psychology major or studying for a law degree, okay? So keep things simple. Don't, for example, use a lot of legal terms to explain a famous court case. Don't say, well, the defense issued a subpoena and then filed a motion for summary judgment after the deposition, but that did not result in an adjournment. The judge agreed in a final judgment that the case should go to a higher court of appeals. Huh? Just tell me, the case was moved up to the next level, to the Supreme Court or to the next level. We don't need all the jargon in the middle, even though it sounds pretty fancy, okay? So think, am I using language that the average person would not understand because they're not in my profession? Similarly, if we're going to use unfamiliar terms or concepts, we absolutely want to define them for our audience. So, do you know what hydraulic fracturing is? Would you be able to explain it to me easily and quickly? Probably not. Basically, this is a concept also known as fracking, where people use high-powered hydraulic or water drills to drill oil and other natural fossil fuels out of the environment, out of the ground. That's kind of how I understand it. I don't even know. Anyway, if I was going to give a persuasive speech arguing against hydraulic fracturing or for it, in favor of it, I would definitely want to define that for my audience first, because your average person does not know what the heck that means. All right. Avoid idioms or colloquialisms. So these are expressions or sayings that are specific to a region or an area of the country or a culture. So be careful. In Texas up through Middle America, like Kansas and Oklahoma, there's a lot of colorful expressions. And I know this because my dad grew up in Kansas, and he will say the craziest things. And one of the things he will say is, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting someone with this thing going on, okay? You can't swing a dead cat. It just means that everybody is going through this thing. Like, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting someone who's been depressed or who's been anxious. It's just so common, all right? But a famous psychologist named Brene Brown used this expression in a talk outside of that region of the United States that I just mentioned. And her fans, millions of people love her, started writing in, I never thought you'd condone animal abuse, and what a horrible thing to say that you'd swing a dead cat. And she was shocked. And then she realized people didn't grow up with this expression that seemed harmless to her. And so she had to explain, I'm from Texas. This is something that we just say to explain that, people with mental health issues are everywhere and we need to help them. So just be very careful for you when you're presenting. Is your audience going to understand your idiom or colloquialism? All right. Are there people in the audience maybe from another region of the country or from another country who would not understand your colloquialism or your idiom? I'm from California, and there are things that we say in the South that I never knew growing up. So just be careful. You never know. And finally, of course, this is an obvious one, but we want to avoid stereotyping any group of people uh, in a speech. It might seem like it's easy to make a joke, uh, and stereotypes can be the butt of jokes, but we want to avoid making assertions and claims like, well, we all know guys aren't emotional, so they can't feel anything I'm talking about right now. But anyway, all right. We don't want to overgeneralize or assume truths because of someone's identity. And we talk about that more in the ethical public speaking chapter. But, just because someone practices a particular religion doesn't mean they absolutely do this, or they go by this name, or they embrace this identity. We all know we're complex creatures with many multifacets, and we never want to assume or blanket over people's identities through our speech. I'm sure you can think of other examples of things you should avoid while speaking. So keep those in mind. What's your personal threshold or level of appropriateness? How do you treat others with kindness and respect as you speak? Your audience will pick up on that and they will understand that. All right. Moving on, I want to quickly discuss psychological audience analysis. This is digging even deeper into audience analysis to anticipate people's or audience's feelings. What might you be able to tap into to sort of change your audience's beliefs about something, their attitudes towards something, values, and behaviors? All right, let's talk about this briefly. Beliefs will be just what we believe about reality. I believe that the sun rises and the sun sets every day. All right. I also believe, and this is not a personal attack on anybody, I personally do not believe that mixing plaid pants with a striped shirt is attractive. So this model here demonstrating this combination, I don't believe that looks attractive personally, where someone else might go, ooh, it's so avant-garde. I love it. But that's not for me. So if that's my belief, that's going to predispose my behavior because I'm going to have a particular attitude or set of beliefs about mixing stripes and plaid. Okay. I think it's not right to me. It's unfashionable. It looks ugly. So yeah, I'm not going to wear that. That's not going to, my behavior is I'm going to wear that sweater with jeans or those pants with a solid color top. Finally, we have values. These are our core beliefs. This is what we have developed over a lifetime to guide our goals in life, our behaviors. So, using this funny example, I would say, well, it's a value to me to be fashionable. Okay, so I'm going to dress in a way that I believe it looks good. All right, but I also might value loyalty. And so my belief might be that it's wrong to betray a friend. So my behavior or my attitude toward friendship is going to be, I'll do anything to not betray a friend, right? You can see how values kind of guide our beliefs and our attitudes. So let me ask you, what do you think is hardest to change out of beliefs, attitudes, and values? I'm thinking values. If you are trying to get an audience to agree with you, to change their opinion on something, or to sway them one way or the other, you're probably not going to change their core values, but you might be able to chip or change some of their beliefs towards something if you make a great argument, or even change their behavior. Okay. Now that I've talked to you about the importance of recycling glass, I hope that you'll at least start recycling glass if you don't recycle yet. Okay. Here's a good starting point for you. So you have a tall order when you're trying to change someone's beliefs or attitudes about something, and you're probably not going to change their values. So I ask you, out of all these values, there's probably one or two that are your top. Okay. You might value freedom and community over all other values, or equality and peace. Okay. So just take a second, think about which one of these is the most important to you? All right. I guarantee when I ask a group of people to rank these values from 1 to 6, everybody has a completely different list. All right. Someone will put freedom at the top, someone will put justice at the top, someone will put security at the bottom, someone will put community at the bottom. It is not that people don't value all of these values or strive to protect, preserve, or achieve all of them. It's more that I have a reason for putting peace at the top based on my own experience, or I have a reason to put freedom at the top. All right. But the thing is, we might all have different lists, but we all value the same things at the end of the day. So how do we as speakers tap into shared values and shared goals for a community? We all want to be secure and safe in our communities. We all want freedom and justice for all people, right? And equality. So in the service of those values, that's where you'll find common ground with your audience, right? Remind them that we're working toward common goals, even if we disagree on the issues. All right. I'm going to cover one more concept and then we're done. Aristotle, many, many millennia ago, existed in ancient Greece, which is considered one of the birthplaces of democracy, where citizens with full rights, so we're not talking about slaves, we're not talking about women, basically men with full rights as citizens would go to the agora or the town meeting place to talk and debate ideas. And they would also go to court. Everyday people had to defend themselves in court. There were no attorneys or lawyers to represent you in a case. So somebody stole your cows from your herd and you want them back. So you're going to court to argue against this person and you've got to do it by yourself. So people would hire the services of philosophers and very intelligent thinkers like Aristotle to help them learn how to argue their points. And Aristotle proposed 3 ways to persuade an audience or connect with an audience. I don't want you to think of these 3 elements as just something we do to convince people that we're right. It's something to just connect with people. So the 3 modes of persuasion or proof are ethos, where we tap into credibility or demonstrate our credibility to an audience. Pathos, our emotional appeals, or how we connect with people emotionally. And then logos is going to be appeals to logic, how we use facts and logic and reasoning to convince people. Okay, we have a serious problem here. That's what I'm arguing. Here's all the evidence for why and what we need to do if this problem goes unsolved. Okay, so think about how can you establish credibility with your audience? How can you connect with them emotionally? And how can you appeal to their reasoning or common sense? We'll talk about this throughout the semester, but what I'd like you to do now is to watch an amazing speech from the 90s called The Whisper of AIDS by Mary Fisher. She spoke at a time where there was a conservative government in place and the AIDS epidemic was beginning or actually quite advanced at this point. People were dying from this mysterious virus. There was a lot of fear and uncertainty around it. People believe that it only affected sort of people at the margins of society, like gay men and African-American men, when in fact it was spreading to all sorts of demographics and people. But those were some of the misconceptions swirling around. And remember, this is an age pre-internet. People only know what they know from reading newspapers and from listening to the news and from talking in their communities. So there were big protests going on because people were dying in droves of HIV/AIDS. And so this is a protest saying that being silent about this issue, not tackling this issue head on, was resulting in the deaths of many people. So it's a sad subject, but here's some more art from that time period. Ignorance equals fear, silence equals death, fight AIDS, act up. If you've ever seen the movie Rent or the musical Rent, it's all about this time period. So please watch the half of the Mary Fisher speech that I'm giving you on Canvas. Conduct some audience analysis. That's what I'm gonna ask you prompting questions to help you do that. Then I'd like you to consider or begin to think about some of the modes of proof that she engages: ethos, pathos, and logos. Again, the video and the specific prompts to do this assignment are located on Canvas. You will find those under Canvas modules. And enjoy the speech. Think critically and carefully about what you're watching, and we'll discuss it soon. Good luck, enjoy, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.